This is Wandering Universe. Today, I'll be exploring Egypt. Yes, we're going back to look into another fascinating chapter, the beautiful monuments at Luxor. So, let's go exploring. This is the map of Egypt, as you can see right in front of you. There's not much, as you can tell, just sand and some mountain ranges and rock in between. And as you can see, this is the start of the River Nile, and it snakes its way down all the way to past the border of Sudan. And we're going to be exploring another little area right here where my arrow is pointing. And this is the place we're going to. So over here, this is a close-up shot of the Karnak Palace. And right down here, where you see marked, is the Luxor Temple. But technically speaking, it is a building. You can call it a temple, a residence, a home, or a palace, an office, commercial building, whatever you want to call it. But today, I'm going to call it Luxor Palace. Ah, yes, Egypt. It was a beautiful place once upon a time ago. Today, the only thing left standing is these buildings, a feat of absolute precise engineering. Now, who can beat that, eh? These monumental buildings have stood the test of time and are still standing today as I speak. In ancient past, the district of Luxor used to have several settlements that surrounded these beautiful buildings. Today, there are only two left standing, the Temple of Luxor and the Karnak Palace. There is something majestic about Luxor. It's situated in the southern part of Egypt and the capital of Luxor Governorate. It's regarded as one of the oldest living cities in the world. The Greeks called the ancient city Thebes. The Egyptians called it Waset, meaning the city of the scepter. Once upon a time ago, it was a private residential area that housed people, but not necessarily us. I'll get into that later. Today, it's an open-air museum, which features the ruins of the famous Luxor Temple and Karnak Palace. Not far from this area is the Valley of the Kings and Queens. The name Luxor is actually pronounced as Uqsor in Arabic, literally meaning palaces. Technically, these are buildings in which anyone can take up residence as long as you have the resources and money to do so. I'm sure you're still trying to wrap your head around the notion that these buildings were used like temples, a place of worship to their once god Amun Ra, a sun god. The Arabic name for Karnak means fortified village. Here are a few odds and ends that I'd like to go over before I introduce something that will pique your interest. What's odd is that there is no written history about these magnificent buildings prior to the 11th dynasty. That's around Bronze Age. Yes, I know there is writing on the wall. I see that. But it doesn't spell who actually lived there before we took over. So, the fact remains, who did actually live in Luxor? Who built these buildings and why? So far, nothing. The only intel I've been getting is that Luxor and its places of grandeur were treated as a place of worship. The city itself was established around the Bronze Age in 2100 BC, which is quite odd, wouldn't you think? Its conquest timeline is that a person by the name of Montuhotep II formed diplomatic relations with Kush, which is today's Sudan, Canaan, Phoenicia and Syria to form negotiable trade route agreements. Through about the Hyksos invasion from Upper Egypt and from 18th dynasty, the city grew into political centralized power that ran a huge military industrial complex. This, of course, would have left their coffers in enormous deficit and begging for bank loans from foreign countries, whilst they increased the religious diversity to a new level. The Babylonians Mitanni, Hittites of Anatolia, which is today's Turkey, Canaanites of Ugarit, Phoenicians, Tyre, which is today's Lebanon, and Minoans from Crete all wanted a piece of Luxor to themselves. It was a city of the gods, and the gods were running the show. They even built a temple called Karnak in honor of their sun god Ra and its other fellow gods. Yep, as with every other empire that came and went before and after it, some buffoon had to come and ruin it for everyone else. The Assyrian emperor Assurbanipal felt entirely bored from his luxury short-stay vacation. He felt relaxing by the beach and soaking up the sun didn't do him much good. In fact, it made his ego restless. So, he got off his banana lounge, kicked in his battle-hardened mindset that propped up his ego to go on a power trip. He came, he stormed, and attacked the city till oblivion. Thebes was in complete disarray, heading straight to hell, and economically speaking, it didn't have a leg to stand on. Then along came an optimized smartass named Alexander the Great, aka Mr. King Dick, got really antsy as his reptile instincts got into gear by inviting his gang of roughnecks to the streets that will give his ego a good stretch and a PR campaign to polish his Mr. Big Shot ego to a high mirror shine. And like any other emperor, he took over Thebes to fight for his right to party by replacing one god with another to his own liking. To make a long tragic story short, Christian crusaders came and went, Roman Empire made very little use of it, and then Christian monks thought it was a good idea to set up camp for their religious rites of passage initiation at the Temple of Hatshepsut and called it Dir el-Bahri. Ugh, that was a mouthful. Now, I don't know about you, but for some weird reason, there is a mosque built in front of the Luxor Palace. Was it to purposely obstruct the path leading to the main entrance? So you have to go inside before you get to the main entrance, right? Why is that? Anyway, look, let's not get rattled up about this. Now, that's tied up some loose ends. Let's get into the guts of Luxor. I truly admire both buildings, mainly for its beautiful piece of architecture. It's a genius work of art. The engineering is phenomenal. And I've heard many theories on how these buildings came to be, such as the foundations were filled with sand trenches to hold up hundreds of tons of stone on top of it. What if it sunk due to heavy monsoon rainfall? Wouldn't the sand underneath soften like that of Leaning Tower of Pisa? I'm still shaking my head over this theory. And yes, the pylons, as you all know, were made of sandstone, basalt and granite, all chiselled, drilled, hammered, using stone-tipped drills and pounders to remove these enormous blocks from the quarry walls, dragging them on wooden sleds for hundreds of kilometres all the way to Luxor in the burning hot sun. But from which quarry? And yes, I know you believe their silver spoon theory like your life really depends on it, that we used this, and this to build this. And the monolithic blocks were excavated in a single piece and transported in wooden sleds once again to the river. And to make matters seem plausible, they all keep feeding you this. The slabs of stone to put up the walls were chiselled with mallets and hammers like this one. Compare the construction technology from this to this. Okay, so you're saying we've come a long way since that time in terms of our construction methods, right? But our buildings today would only last between 150 to 300 years tops. Wouldn't that suggest that today's construction methods in the property development boom are cutting corners to save costs? Be careful what you buy. And what is so ingenious about these pre-ancient construction techniques is that none of the stone blocks right here, as you can see in front of you, ever used cement mortar in between the gaps. Now, That is amazing engineering, and it truly surpasses our modern construction techniques. To me, these buildings were abandoned by a group of beings. I'm not sure what event unfolded during that time, but for some reason something went wrong, badly wrong, and they packed up and left it as it were. One thing is for certain, these buildings were in no way, shape or form done by us. We just stumbled upon it by luck. They were abandoned buildings long before we set foot on them. We did not build them, but I know who did. In the next video, I'll be exploring the whodunit part of magnificent Luxor, and it's not what you think. That's all for now.